just for Brad's been kidnapped.
The coffee machine summoned me.
You were kidnapped by the coffee machine?
It just summoned me. I responded.
You responded. So
Yes.
I say I wanted to, can we discuss something? And it's because our meeting was very successful at telling us a lot of things about ourselves, our audience, our group, our movement. And I was trying to say, what are we learning from the fact that, I guess it was Walter, somebody said the men's social club. Actually, the fact that the law is a really big fucking tent. Right? I mean, there's no bigger tent.
This is the biggest tent.
Right. The second is that because of via negativa. The second is this warrior monk thing that we seem to have in common among the people that come in. In other words,
Right.
A Christian wouldn't call me a Christian, but from my analysis, I'm a pretty devoted Christian, so to speak. So we have an awful lot of guys who are either Christian or from the church system or studied theology or something, right?
That's right.
I'm definitely a product of the Catholic Church, right? I mean, there's no, Noah was trained to be a priest, right? I mean,
Right.
pastor, whatever you call them. I don't
Right.
know. Sect has its own name. So we have this weird warrior monk thing. We have this men's social club aspect. We have this family first aspect. These are all pretty traditional Western intuitions, priorities. Priorities is the right word.
That is a good word.
Priority word. And I was thinking, so there's this whole thing, and I know the guys are looking for. I pushed back on this a little bit. I keep getting in trouble for this, but it's because I'm not addressing it properly. But when you build an organization, it's better to have a charter and base it on people agreeing with the charter than to have it based on people and roles.
That's right.
And there's a desire for organization.
Right.
And there's desire for local organizations where personal bonds of trust can be made, because that's how we work, right? We basically make in our organization, we make everything personal.
That's right.
We make the political personal. So we need some sort of, we need the equivalent of a charter. Now, the first thing that comes to mind, and I hate doing this, bringing this example up, because the problem is it's an example people understand, but it's also because it's an example people understand, people invent stupid shit in this model all the time.
Okay.
If you look at the various monastic knights, or the Jesuits. Let's take the Jesuits as a better example. They're sort of like the intellectual version of the Templars, right?
Yeah.
You have these charters, and they're sort of like an oath of promises. And so what happens is that the organizations can maintain internal dynamics without becoming dependent upon individuals. And the reasons that's important is that as organizations scale, the first people who come in are not always the people who rise to the time. They fulfill the role to the limit of their ability, and they have to make room for others that have more ability. And so you can't really make these things dependent on people. So there's this desire for all this locality, right? In other words, people want to be able to form groups. They can only do that if we have this contract, right? This charter,
Right.
right? We have the solutions already. Hold on one second, I check something. And I'm trying to, I lost you is why there we go. Well, it's just, there's a thing which is a window float on top. Is there, and no, view. Yeah, I don't have the ability to make this thing stay on top of everything. I don't know why that is the case. Anyway, so we have all these properties, and I'm not trying to, I know it's one of the things, I do a lot of is I don't do fitting, right? I look at
Right.
all the properties and I say, okay, what does that, where are there commonalities with institutional frameworks in the past? And so I'm looking at all of this and I'm saying there's clearly a need for the restoration of masculine organizations. Those masculine organizations need to be in the format of the church, in what we would call a militia, what we call of men's organizations, and that's real, right? We've currently got, it looks like an unfortunate monopoly, or unfortunate in the sense that it's weird that we're the only ones. We sort of like the intellectual monopoly going on here. So
nobody else is sufficiently capitalized to operate in this space.
Right. Okay. So it's very hard for other people. There's nobody. In other words, there just aren't any other intellectual foundations that are coming forward, and we've figured out why that is, because it's effing hard.
That's all.
So we have all these things, and then you brought up, well, what's his name brought up? Noah brought up the public house venue for us really works as a both spiritually and as a branding. It's not, because I come from the Ivy Tower world, right, where you get hotels and things like that. And you know what? It's the public house
public house is the real place where the people go.
That's where the people go. So I really like that. It's also much easier for us to find venues that provide the kind of atmosphere we want to be in, which they have food, they have drink, they're already organized to socialize rather than just to present, right? And so they're already there. And you got all that camaraderie we're really good at. So we're really good at a lot of these things that the public really wants. And we have this big tent thing, and it looks like we just need to put a constitution together that, it's whatever, as long as you adhere to this.
No, that's right. I want you to not use the word constitution.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I knew I made a mistake when I said it. This charter together.
Yes, charter.
This charter together, and that our goal is this stuff in the law, and that as long as it fits within those two domains, it doesn't matter.
It's okay.
It doesn't, we don't care, because we do the whole spectrum from law to the family to law to institutions to economies to education to the family to the individual to the spirit. We've got this whole thing across the spectrum. So when I look at this, I'm like, I don't go back and say, hey, look at what this guy did, we should do that. I really don't. I just have a basic first principles engineering approach, as we seem to be good at these things to be really in, making it personal. We make it personal. We are goal oriented. We have an intellectual foundation, but we address the entire practical spectrum. In other words, we may have this intellectual stuff, but all you need, what I found was interesting is people kept saying, you guys are way smarter. And I'm like, yeah, but the thing is, our policies and our answers and our explanations resonated with ordinary people.
They must,
right?
Or they're no use.
Right. And so so we have the intellectual thing, but we're actually reaching these people. I think what John was doing is something similar to what Rudyard is doing, which is he's really got the Christian audience, and the Christian audience is pretty effective. Right?
Yes.
So we really have to basically stay away from the Lost Boys and stay with the family side, because then we get the men, not the boys.
Whoever can comport themselves in a fashion that is consistent with the charter
Or then that's fine.
and the science, they're okay. I wanted to address this. I was asked by a nice lady at our conference. She said she would feel better if we said God, because we don't say God. And I was forced to address this because I'm like, why won't you say God? And I'm like, I said, we can't, because we can't testify to it. I can't show you how to find God.
Right.
But I said this, the way to look at this is, in what are we saying anything that is inconsistent with what God's will would be?
Yes. No.
And that's all. And that caused her to rethink it, which is the via negativa of it, which is it all points to God, right? That's evolutionary computation. So who's doing the computing?
And this is the thing. I think you gave the best possible answers. We don't say anything we can't testify to, but try to falsify anything we say against what God would wish. You can't, because the natural law is the evidence of God, right? That's the evidence.
The tracks.
So we don't get to have an opinion about what the evidence is. We can only testify to the evidence. And the next thing is, if we all follow that law that God sent out, it doesn't really matter if I'm a fundamentalist Christian, a traditionalist Christian, a spiritual Christian, a traditionalist Christian, or an intellectual Christian.
You're fitting in as long as you're within the rules that are the science tells us.
Well, and the science is a law. It's a law of the universe. That means,
that's right.
It's a God. It's God's law.
Well, it's logos, which is the word of God, right? Which is the way it's put together. We're simply trying to mirror that.
Yep. And so I think that's the way we handle it. And so our attitude is, we cannot testify to which God is true.
No.
Right? We can only testify to the evidence of what God, if there is a God, what this God has laid out for us. We can testify to that, and there's no refutation. There's no way to refute. I mean, you're not going to win an argument with us over what's testifiable to, given the natural. I mean, we've unified the sciences. There's no way to defeat us. So you end up with the people who need to believe the mythical version of religion instead of in other words, there's people who really need to believe angels came down and did something.
Well, I say this, it's like they prefer to use that logic language
and grammar, correct. So thank you. God, you've gotten so good at this. Well, and I'm like, so that's the logic, language, and grammar you use, and this is logic and grammar, but we don't disagree on what
They're not inconsistent. It's not immixable.
Right. It's not inconsistent. And so I think that helps us with the big tent. So I don't understand. I mean, you can't be, it's very hard for a Westerner to say I'm not a Christian, because you can't, I mean, you could take someone like even the pagans, right? Try to find a pagan cult that isn't 80% Christian doctrine over ancestral Germanic doctrine, right? You're not going to find that. Even if you look at the what's the witchcrafty one? I can't remember. Wicca type thing. That is all saying why? Because the fundamental premise that these things are all sharing in common non-aggression into the community for the development of social order and a sharing of values. So I mean, we're not going to get away from the fact that we are truly Aryan in the sense that we still have our law, right? We are truly Germanic in the same way that we still have our myths and legends and spirits and stuff like that. I mean, I'm probably as much a product of ghost stories as true stories. And I think about my life, and I never miss even a grade C horror movie if I can help it. So that's it. And then in the sense that we're Christian, we are some varying degrees of that. So I always say there's the military state, the Constitution, and the church. And we are, it's really the state is irrelevant in our, it's really the military, the Constitution, and the faith. And, where your priority in there
That's
is,
right.
doesn't mean you're outside the triangle.
You're under the big tent.
You're in the tent somewhere. And whether and I know where I am in there, right? I'm sort of on the military law side of it, right? But if you say to me, but if you say to me, you ask me if I'm about Christian values, I'm going to say, well, I'm going to end up being a Christian. I might be the militaristic, masculine side, the aristocratic side of it, rather than the submissive side. And a lot of Christians, like the Muslims, it's about submission. I'm not in the submissions, and I'm the responsibility side of it. But there's, as long as you're in the triangle, you're in the tent.
There's a place for it. The tent is as big as it needs to be.
Yep. So the only problem is, are you a parasite rather than a contributor or cooperator? And the truth is that some people are parasites because they're bad people, and some people are parasites because they are broken people.
Mm-hmm.
People are parasites because they have found an excuse to be a parasite, and some reason people are parasites because they have found advantage in it.
Yep.
And some people are only parasitic so much as it's almost inescapable given the social construct that we've artificially produced. And then there's a bunch of productive people. And so there's parasitic people in every class, right? Turns to be weird as the middle class tends to be the least. Right, but the more you go up in class above the middle class, the more likely you're to find parasitism, and the farther down you go, the more likely you're to engage in parasitism. So it is a war of the ends against the middle. So we're talking about this, and from my standpoint, the big thing I'm wrestling with is a thing that you and I hinted about a couple years ago, and we only touch now and then, is there is this religious aspect to what we're doing that isn't scriptural at all. In other words, there's something.
The function I would relate it to is the sense of duty, obligation to create a social environment that is beneficial for the betterment of all in the future.
Yeah, but we don't believe in equality. We say, there's some of us who are capable and
right,
and there are people who are not. There's some of us who can think really, and most people can't. And so, you look at this and you say, well, am I doing the right thing? Paterno familia, are we being men, right? For not only ourselves, our families, our societies, but our nation. Are we being responsible, or being men, which is means being responsible? And so how do you frame? I mean, it's one. No, I wish. Thank you for being patient with me as I work through how to talk about this. You're a saint for what you do.
Mhm.
So, but there, what I intellectually I've always understood our movement. In other words, I understood it intellectually. I understood it morally, and right. In other words, as a moral ambition. But I've never really thought or understood it socially until the experience that I had at our last. And that's because I've also been in Hoff's organization, and I've also been in the Mises organization, right? And I've also been in church organizations, and I've also been in sports teams. Interesting enough, I feel like we're closer to a sports team loyalty than we are to all the others. If you have a regiment, in other words, a militia, you might even go farther than the sports team.
Right.
Right. But so we have this aspect, and I'm not really sure how to talk about that, despite the fact that my intuition tells me from observing people that is what really sells and holds people and binds people together. Because intellectually knowing something, that's great. It means those guys are going to do something. But the minute I'm a member of a group that tells me, here's how the world is, and here's why you're right and how you think and feel, and here's how to talk about it and justify your thoughts and feelings, that becomes very powerful. And you saw what happened to these people who'd never met us before, right? It was profound. We didn't get the thing where we usually get where people disappeared. We didn't get the thing where people were like, not paying attention during the lectures. We didn't get any of those effects that I've observed over and over and over again. We got attention, and we got the sense that something meaningful was happening here. Right. That was even. I can't remember who that woman was. It was over on because we went through a bunch of women who sat like 3/4 of the way in the back against the right-hand wall as you come in, right? And they would stay for like most of a day, and they were just like blown away. And like, if we're reaching that woman, we're doing something right.
Right.
And the membership they felt, right? The guys are more men, right? Men, we can build bonds, right? Even and then the two women you were talking to, who were very courageous in participating. These aren't average women, right? These are pretty amazing women you were talking to, right? So I look at that and I'm like, we're doing something socially right that I haven't seen at other events.
I think it's because of the operational function that we are seeking to engage.
So I can usually translate Brad's parsimony, and I can't do that one.
Goes like this: is the chief difference is not intellectual. It's not limited to intellectual. We're seeking to generate positive social change. So activism is operationalism, is the difference.
All right.
Because I'm not trying to convince you, because I'm like, you're going to figure it out on your own that we're right, because you cannot falsify what we're saying. And so when you figure it out, then you can take a place.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a place for you. We're just holding the seat for you. It's okay. And we're not in a hurry. You'll figure it out at your own speed, and we'll help you if you need help or you ask for help. But we're operational, and we're seeking to generate operations that are for the betterment of the society. And that's what everybody feels the need for, because they look out their window and it's just a wreck.
Yeah, I discussed, I don't know if you remember me talking about this during the Q&A today, but I talked to a friend of mine because one of our guys came to me, he's on the spectrum, he says he's not getting the right kind of support from his medical professionals. I'm like, dude, I'm listening to you, there's nothing wrong with your mind other than the ADD, right? I mean,
Right?
and I've had to become very skilled in these subjects. So I asked a friend of mine to if she would talk with him,
Hmm.
and we just got sidetracked because I was saying, well, I run into a lot of guys in the spectrum because there's a certain tendency, there's a personality type that is drawn to and understands truth before all, and so we're going to attract the people who care about truth before any other thing, right? They just want the explanatory power, whereas most people, of course, they can't do that. It has to, whatever they understand has to agree with whatever their sentiment is,
Hmm.
right? And so there are personality types that go with this, and I'm not the first person to say, and there's a lot of people who said this, is that the masculine end of the spectrum, what we call the high systematizing to low autistic spectrum, that's like the direction of evolution, right? I mean, it's not a disability, except when you're trying to deal with normies, right? It's actually an advantage in every other aspect. So, but I was talking to her, and I said, so this is my observation of the mental health crisis, and she's talking to me about their network, and she's one of those providers that's in a number of networks. I mean, you know this because you're in networks, right? And so they have this huge collection of professionals across the country in these different networks, right? And she said, you can't get an appointment today in the mental health business. You can't get one because there's a complete social breakdown. And we talked about it, but I mean, I said it, I told her in advance, I have a way of framing this because I think about it neurologically.
Right.
I think it from bottom up, and I wanted to hear her take on it as what are the people experiencing. And she's, roughly speaking, people are lost, confused, don't know what to do, and don't know how to win. Right.
That's right. They're
Right.
demoralized is the word.
Right. Which was the goal of the left, right? It was to demoralize them.
So they were successful. Good for them. That
Well,
was their day in the sun, and their day is over.
yeah, but you just said, 20 minutes ago, or whatever it was, that marching back through the institutions is not, it took them a long time to march through our institutions. It doesn't mean we have to take the same amount of time to march back through our institutions of cultural production. And the
That's
reason
right.
is we've got the science of it, right? We can falsify any claim.
That's false. Yes, we
It's
can.
false. It's just not going to stand. And so I mean, I don't mean, it doesn't mean it's not a challenge. It means that it's not an insurmountable problem.
That's right. So the issue is generating a social organization that will be with masculine and feminine elements. Two parallel organizations underneath the big tent. And
Men, women in the family. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
and then the with a goal toward with a clear charter to operationalize the march through the institutions, which the left did by intuitional functions and huge institutional support.
Well, they planned it out, but they certainly did it because it was intuition. It was an intuition for them. Yes.
But that it was but we can do it in a more systematic way.
Yes. Very fascinating. The more I work on you and your fucking Jesus was the end of religion.
Pardon me? The audience needs to understand what you just referred to.
It's just like when it's like, to me, I've like struggled with issues for years, right? I work on them very hard. And then you or somebody else comes out with a fucking one-liner that's like makes it all fit together. And I'm like, how did I miss that?
You didn't miss it.
Well,
You did not miss it. Okay. The fact is you got it and you gathered it. It's just one of the steps you skipped because it's self-evident.
That's true. Okay.
And so you did not bother to articulate it because you were busy thinking about something else.
Because I do bigger. Yeah, okay, that's great. But your point that Jesus is the end of the religious.
He solved the problem of religion. It's the end of the arc.
Fuck. And that's just, yes, damn it. Right? I mean, it's like, ugh. And then so this percolates through my understanding of the church, right? And what went wrong between Rome and the church, right?
Okay.
And that if it weren't for rather seditious people, we might have not had 1,000 years of dark age. Just like right now, we need to make sure we don't have another 1,000 years of dark age. And so I just keep working with this idea because and the more I work with it, the more explanatory power I have. Because I just looked at it as, well, I mean, we're an aristocratic civilization, right? Which has these values. And then the Middle East is a peasant civilization that has these values, right? And so this partly because the difference in who's trying to domesticate who. To some degree, the Middle East is trying to domesticate all the raiders, right? While in the West, the European raiders are trying to domesticate the tribes, the hunter-gatherers and the agrarians into the aristocratic civilization. So what Jesus does is he provides the vehicle for obtaining status if you're weak, right? Without all the negativity that comes with the hostility that comes with the traditional Middle Eastern cults because they're so tribal. And so you say, well, I mean, I usually look at it as, well, he solved the problem of integration of the lower classes into the Greco-Roman European civilization by making it possible to have status by simply doing nothing wrong. Whereas in the traditional sense, you had to do something right to have status. Mm-hmm. And that means you needed resources and intelligence and skills and whatever. That's a capital intense. So if you had no capital, you can't get status, right? But if you're a Christian, you can have status if you don't have capital.
Wait, but the issue of the problem that was solved there was Jesus solved the problem of the tribes. Multi-tribalism was the problem, and it's a universal function that Jesus introduced into the
right. That's the broad, and that's in other words, that's the broader problem. But in the sense of the problem that the Middle East faced ever since the Bronze Age collapse was the superiority of the Indo-Europeans. And they could not compete. The Middle Easterners could not compete with the Indo-Europeans, whether it be Persians or European, Persians and Europeans. They couldn't do it. And so, and hadn't the Persians and the Europeans exhausted each other, we would have never had the Islamic expansion. So, I mean, it's basically a counter-revolution against the Indo-European aristocratic civilization, because that aristocratic civilization was not as destructive as they were used to in the Middle East, which is all these rent seekers. Instead, it was a productive civilization among the Indo-Europeans. So they were essentially more technologically advanced civilization of the Indo-Europeans. In other words, social technology, political technology, administrative technology was superior to the social and political technology of the Middle East, which was based on religion. And the problem with religion is slowly adaptive, right? It's not very dynamic, whereas rules and laws and institutions, they're instantaneously adaptive. So it made, so what the problem was is that you just had no, I mean, the way that the Europeans, Indo-Europeans looked at other peoples, the peoples, right? It was as basically undomesticated animals, semi-domesticated animals, or domesticated animals. And they viewed labor, human labor, the way we viewed animal labor until the development of the machine. So, so the ability for a person to have any kind of status, if you're just labor, it didn't exist. You were just a problem that needed to be contained because you had, questionable morals or whatever, right? And so now instead of that, Christianity came about when the Romans had created enough, Greeks and the Romans had created enough Western order across the trade zones that there was economic room for people to have migration choices and whatever. And the problem is that the people needed to be able to adopt those things when they were actually hostile. They were traditionally hostile to the aristocratic things. So Jesus provided a pathway. So I'm looking at it from the systemic side. When you look at it, so did he solve the problem of tribes? Well, he solved the problem of all of the groups, which is, he said,
Yep.
the minute you say, I'm a member of God's children, not a member of my family or a member of my clan or a member of my tribe or a member of my nation or a member of an empire. He gave all those people the only way to win is to not prey upon each other, right? Is to non-aggress, instead do the opposite, which is care for each other. This creates a virtuous cycle, which is the solution to the prisoner's dilemma of cooperation. It's counter fucking intuitive to just endlessly forgive people, right? Just take.
There's a limit of that opportunity.
Yeah, right. To the limit of that opportunity, it's counterintuitive. It's the opposite of what we think, but it turns out it's exactly how you do it, because eventually the value of the in-group, in other words, the low friction and high trust of the in-group, will always defeat the low trust group. And so it absolutely works. And so I just think, from my standpoint, I see this as absolutely a brilliant innovation. Buddha tried a similar thing, but he did it by withdrawal.
Yep.
Instead of exercise.
Right.
And I won't go into how the Muslims screwed this up, but the Christians overdid their thing, right? Too much, but it was really good because there's a lot of people who aren't aristocracy. It's a majority slave world. And so when these people, the Christianity came in, you had an organizing principle for huge numbers of people.
Right.
Now, despite what Christians want, it had to be imposed, right? Christianity had to be imposed in most places. Right. It wasn't exactly, it was a minority cult thing today, like woke is today. But once it was imposed, it did actually provide the institutional framework to lift all those classes out of being domesticated animals into a realm of responsibility, even if the responsibility was only for peace, harmony, and non-aggression against.
So that create the framework for a high trust society.
Correct, and it is counter. The brilliant thing about it is it's not passive.
Yeah.
Right. You forgive, right, and then you act charitably. The thing that happened, though, is that unlike Islam, which doubled down on fundamentalism, we got stuck in fundamentalism for a while, but we Germanicized Christianity as it spread. And so we maintained our traditional legal political system. So their faith could never defeat the political system like it could, because frankly, the European aristocracy captured the church for its own use.
Right. So I'd say that my take on the arc of history goes that Jesus solved the problem 2,000 years ago, And it took 1,000 years, you call the Dark Ages, for the church to become integrated into the Western civilization. At which time that was when the aristocracy had made a pact with the Roman Church.
That's correct.
And that's how I see it.
And it maintained for functionalism. We had the law, we had the aristocracy, we had the faith. It worked just fine. Then there was enough trust and enough restoration of trade that the middle class could develop, and especially under manorialism, which is sort of punitive to the lower classes. You had downbreeding from the middle classes until the majority of the European population was genetically middle class. Even the poor people were genetically middle class. And so you had this amazing reserve of genetic capital by the end of the late Middle Ages, in the early modern period. And so you gave those people literacy, and it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. I mean, it just lit up like crazy. Then the Muslims come down and if they regret this, shut down the ports and tell us we got to go figure out the age of sail. And by that, and at that point, we got the restoration of Greek thought. We've got the Aquinas's demarcation. We've got the literacy. We've got trade. We've got the English invention of the modern state, right? And the English and Dutch invention of the modern corporation. And it's all over. I mean, it's all the argument the economists would make is that the primary error that Muslims made is that because they're a low trust society and they had all these rules about wealth, they actually made themselves permanently poor. And so they couldn't develop these high trust institutions. And they couldn't develop a high trust government. They couldn't have high trust courts. They still had the ethics of the bazaar, and they had inheritance practices which were punitive for the creation of wealth. So even with the advantage they had in trade because of their location, in other words, the reason for Middle Eastern trade is success was just because it's the unification of the river valleys plus what we call the Silk Road, but it's basically the trade routes between them. Well, I mean, those are overland, but the minute you go to the sea, I mean, it costs nothing to ship stuff by water compared to by land.
Right.
It was over. So if you take a low trust people, you can even profit reasonably well because of all that trade between all these river valley civilizations. Sure, you can do that. You're going to get, and there's going to be lots of information flow, but you get left behind because your religion reinforces the low trust that's natural and endemic to your people. It's just an utter failure. Something that bothered you there because you were thinking.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine. We're doing all right. And so the issue is this: we're regenerating a social organization. Just to get back to where we started, right? We're generating a social organization for the purpose of reconstituting the trifunctional nature of our civilization, which has been debauched by money power, essentially.
Well, it's money power, the category of people who exercise money power, and the easy victimization, easy attraction of women to things with money power, right? And so consumption. So it's really those three things. Now, we've talked about this. We're talking about this religious aspect of what we're, I'm trying to understand how to talk about the emotional, spiritual aspect of what it appears we're producing, right?
Okay.
And I'm looking at the other side, which is, look, we can skip the race issue, but the sex issue is going to be very hard to skip. And so I want, when we get into this, when we say a men's organization, I don't really like it. I like it in the sense that it turns out to be relatively true, but in the sense of I want women in there because we want the responsible women, right? And responsible women seem to be okay saying, yeah, lots of women are not very good at this politics thing. And so when we say there's so much wrong with our civilizations, it's just not true. It's just that we've not regulated female behavior as thoroughly as we've regulated male behavior, because we've never had the ability of females to exercise influence on the scale that they can exercise today. And so our institutions always lag, and that's what's happening. Unfortunately, we left a hole open, and between the monetary interest, the people who can support the monetary interest, and the ease of which women are manipulated by such interests, we end up with conflict. And so what I would rather see us look at is, how do we deal with this unification of men and women? Because the way I look at it, we're not unless we have an institution called the family that's for mutual benefit. I don't know how we reconcile the problem of men and women. Unless we have we can either prevent women from being in politics, or we can give women a house, or we can give them a vote.
I would say to make a house for them.
Right. And so I'm not trying to disassociate anybody as much as provide a means for the resolution of conflicts and intuition and instinct, so that we can continue to maintain the institutions of a high trust society.
Right. So I think what you do is you make two houses, and both of them they're different, and they have their own rule making potentials within them.
Yep.
But you make two different organizations for that purpose, and they interact with one another through channels.
Yep.
Which is they make trades as necessary.
Right. And this gets us over the big lie. So then what about as our organization? I guess we just say what we want to do, right? We say it openly, what we're trying to do.
Very simple.
Restore the positive relationship between men and women.
Right.
We have to restore the positive relationship, because we can't survive if we don't do that.
So what's interesting? So you're going to end up with a trifunctional system, right?
Yep.
You have a men's house, you have a women's house, and then you have the construction of the two, which is the family.
Yep.
Which is the productive output.
Yep. And I just see that as, when we talk about this, is the problem with individualism, is law has to be individual. We have to maximize individual potential, right? In other words, we shouldn't limit people to their familial potential. On the other hand, in other words, because that's what happens, right, is you limit people artificially to something other than their individual performance. But the purpose of policy has to be the family, and the priority has to be the family, because otherwise you're not producing the first institution that makes all other institutions possible, which is the family. Now, we might be able to say that the nature of the family has to change.
Right.
And I would say maybe that's true. Maybe the nature of education and training, law and social order has to change to get return for the priority of the family. And if you look around the world, I think that's the more obvious solution.
See, I've been thinking about this since we've been talking for some time, and I'll tip my hat to Uncle Kenny, because I've been holding my tongue. Right.
Why do you two like to tease each other? I think it's
that's always happy to chat about Uncle Kenny. He's been a great help to me. So it goes like this. What I was thinking of was this: there's a I don't know if I would call it a motto, but the Marine Corps says it: God, family, country, Corps.
Yeah, exactly.
That's appropriate prioritization. And the only one we can point to, in fact, we can testify to, is family, country, Corps.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we are aspired to God.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so that's how I wanted to. I think that gives us a framework within which we can understand it. So a men's house, a woman's house, and then a trade, which is the family.
Right.
Everything else below that.
The family at all scales. You trade intersexually in your family.
Right.
trade as families in society, and you trade as a great as a as a super family or nation between the sexes at the level of the commons, which is the state, the government. So I think that's fine. I guess I would still say that that you have to have responsibility. You have to demonstrate responsibility in order to participate in that in the institution of responsibility.
There you go.
I think that's still the only criteria.
That's fair. Or even participation may be involved in this construct of the will to take responsibility.
Right.
Which is to say, people who have no responsibility that seek responsibility are invited.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a willingness to accept responsibility, that's sufficient, because it's like you don't have to have demonstrated the responsibility because you're just a kid, that you're just 18 or whatever you know what I mean? You're just getting started and you have not had the opportunity to demonstrate responsibility to anything of any scale.
So nobody rides for free, basically.
That's right.
Nobody rides the responsibility carousel for free.
That's right.
Look, I mean, so weird that responsibility ends up being such a big, just, I don't know, why is that surprising to me? It's because it's the first principle, right? I wouldn't have expected it to be so much so a first principle. Why are you laughing at me?
It goes to acquisition,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like acquisition without imposition of costs on others is a social responsibility.
Okay, so you're right down there to the very basics. Yeah. Well, okay, so I really enjoyed our chat this afternoon.
We had a good little chat. It's probably because you had a little nap there. That's what I think, but I don't know.
I'm a little afraid of you now that Brad, you got to understand, you guys don't know this, but Brad didn't have to work this morning, so he got to sleep in. And before you came on, he was owning me with a series. All right, so I'm a little afraid of Brad when he's fully rested. Just joking. All right, so I'll record and save this. I believe tomorrow we're on. Oh, wait a minute, we're on for tomorrow. I am prepared for tomorrow.
Right on.
So we are going to go try to take all those pieces of the behavioral laws and draft at least the order of them, right? And figure out how to make them harmonized. Because we have 3 documents we've got to put into one science.
Right.
And we'll do our best, and hopefully I won't have too much smoke. We won't, each of us have too much smoke coming out of our ears.
Right.
So
That's
you
right.
want to do your thing, like, subscribe?
I do. Do please, all of you, hit like, hit subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And don't forget to leave the comments, because we'd love to hear from you and enjoy them.
Every time I say tell Brad he's good looking or something, people
actually. Oh my Lord.
And so I'm not going to say it today, but if somebody manages,
if it's your fault. That was very clever, backhanded.
All right. I love you, man. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Bye-bye.